Good morning. Welcome to the Streicker Center. I am Marjorie Schuster. I am the coordinator of our literary events at Temple Emanu-El. This is the second of our 11-part female author series that we call Women on the Move, where we interview top female authors and we hear a bit about their careers, their lives, and their latest books. Thank you to the Samuel I. Newhouse Foundation for their sponsorship of this series. Today, we have not one, but two amazing authors with us. It is really a thrill to have them both with us in conversation, as their books are thrilling and full of the twists and turns that keep us all up at night. Jean Hanff Korelitz is the author of 7 novels, including, hi Jean, You Should Have Known, which was adapted into the HBO series The Undoing, starring none other than Hugh Grant and Nicole Kidman. Admission, also adapted into a film with Tina Fey and 5 others. Today, though, we will talk about her latest book, The Plot. We also have Lisa Jewell, the British author who has written 18 books, one more exciting than the next. Today, though, we are speaking about the night she disappeared. As always, please write your questions in the chat feature of Zoom, and we will get to as many as we can. Let me fix my camera. Hello, both of you. Welcome, and thank you so much for being with us. I am very, very excited that I get to host this discussion because there is so much that I would like to ask you both, and I'm sure there's so much everybody wants to hear. I, of course, read both of your books, and once you start reading your books, you really cannot stop. But for those who haven't yet read your books, let's start with Jean, and then we'll talk to Lisa, then we'll talk all together. Jean, can you give us a little overview of The Plot and the world that you created?
It's a difficult book to talk about because there's so much we don't want the reader to know in advance. So just sticking to what's on the jacket copy, The Plot is about a novelist who I think Lisa would agree is we're allowed to call him a failed novelist, who has sort of been reduced to teaching in a just bottom of the barrel MFA program in Vermont. This is not the Iowa Writers Workshop. This is not University of East Anglia. This is not, where the great ones go. This is the kind of place you sign up for and write a check and you go. So he's not all that excited about his students, with good reason. And when one particularly arrogant, narcissistic student walks into his workshop claiming that he has this brilliant idea that's going to make him a huge best-selling author, our protagonist doesn't really believe him. But then in a private conference, he gets the student to tell him what this great plot is. And unfortunately, he's forced to agree that this really rotten guy is really about to become a literary sensation. Some years later, he discovers that this student has died without ever publishing, probably even writing his book. And he makes a fateful decision to write his own book using this plot. And he does, as his late student suggested, become a massive success, but he can't enjoy it because he's too afraid that somebody is going to come out of the woodwork and accuse him of something bad. And then someone does. And that is all I will say.
Well, we have a lot to talk about with that. Lisa, I would like you also please to give an overview of your world and book.
Okay, well, The Night She Disappeared, it starts with a young couple, Zach and Tallulah. They're teenage parents, and they head off to the pub on a Friday night, and they leave their baby at home with Tallulah's mum, Kim. And in the pub, they live in a village out in the countryside. In the pub, they cross paths with some kids from the local boarding school, the posh kids. And one of the posh kids invites them back to her mansion out in the countryside for a pool party. And Tallulah texts her mum, says, "Is it all right if we stay out a bit longer? We've been invited to a party." And her mum says, "Of course, off you go. Have fun." And she wakes up the next morning and finds out that Zach and Tallulah have never returned home. And it remains a mystery. Nobody knows what happened to Zach and Tallulah. The girl whose house they were at claims that they got in a taxi at 2 a.m. Nobody knows where they are. And then the action picks up again a year later when a new head teacher comes to the boarding school in the village. And his partner, Sophie, is a detective novelist. And on her first day, exploring the grounds of this boarding school, she finds a sign nailed to a fence with the words "Dig Here" scrawled on it. And Sophie, being a detective novelist, obviously digs. And she finds a clue, and that clue brings the mystery back out into the light, the mystery of the disappearance of Zach and Tallulah.
And at both of those points in the book is when nobody goes to sleep, right? Both of your books.
Yes. Keep reading.
and we do. Let's start with Jean. So, Jean, I know you've heard these questions many times, but the central part of your book is really who owns an idea. Yeah. Do you own the ideas? Evan Parker, I suppose he's the name of the student. He speaks to Jacob. Jacob doesn't write the same, he doesn't copy one word. So let's touch on that a little bit. It's basically, I guess, the idea of intellectual property, right?
Yeah. And, one question that I have been asked, which I think is a really interesting question, is what's the big deal? So what if, somebody says this based on a plot that somebody else told you about? Isn't that what we're all doing? I mean, when West Side Story is written, by Leonard Bernstein, Stephen Sondheim et al., what else are they doing but taking Romeo and Juliet, a story which, by the way, Shakespeare himself took from somewhere else, and changing it and creating an entirely new work of art? The answer is not that Jake fears the condemnation of authors. I'm assuming, Lisa, you would agree with me that what Jake does is not particularly evil or wrong. But what he really fears is the condemnation of people who aren't authors, otherwise known as readers, and the rest of the world. And we know that this happens all the time. I mean, there's nothing like a good pylon of an author who somebody suggests has plagiarized or stolen or appropriated or mishandled or any of the other, varieties of appropriation. I mean, look at James Fry. He stole from himself and he ended up pilloried. I'm not defending James Fry. I'm just saying it is a very valid fear that he has. So, I think these issues about who owns what and who's entitled to do what are labyrinthine, and I think they're very, very common for us authors. We're quite obsessed with them, actually.
Right. So, good answer. So you have two full stories intertwined. When I first started reading your book, and probably everybody else, I was fascinated by Jacob, the publishing business, the author tours. I mean, this is, what we're involved in. So the book sales, it was just really, really fascinating. But then slowly, we start to see all the clues that you've hidden throughout your book. And I absolutely loved them. And I'd like to know if we could talk a little bit about them. I'll throw the first one out, I guess. Of course, it's Ripley College, which doesn't exist.
Of course.
The name you chose, well, of course, but the name you chose for that, I loved.
Yeah, that was a tipping of the hat to who, yeah. And to perhaps the fact that there would be a sociopath or two in the future of the book. But the real hidden in plain sight clue is the plot of a novel that two important characters discuss in the early part of the novel. And I really hesitated to put this clue there because I just thought it was too obvious. But what's really interesting to me is that even those readers who did pick it up assumed I was just, having a laugh or a joke, something along the lines of Ripley College. But it's interesting to me that that Jake himself misses this clue, and much of what happens to him could have been avoided if he had not missed it.
Very interesting. Let's jump over to Lisa a little bit. Your novels also, they are multiple storylines, multiple characters, multiple relationships. So I'd like to talk a little bit about yours. I mean, your characters are so rich, they're so complex, and you kind of slowly unravel who they are over time. Is it important to you that the readers relate to your characters? Do you think that the plot development or the character development is sort of more important, and particularly in this story?
So I started off writing romantic comedies and relationship-based novels. So I come from a background of that's the entire focus of the book is to get the readers to engage with your characters, to make them love the characters, to make them care about the foibles of these characters' love lives. So that's kind of a given for me. When I sit down to write any novel, it's a given to me that I'm going to write characters that are either so ambiguous and grey and sinister and unknowable that the reader is going to be obsessed by them, trying to work out, is this a good person or a bad person, or they're fundamentally likable and you're rooting for them. So for me, having gone from writing relationship novels and I've segued quite slowly from that into writing thrillers, the plot is my main driver. And because I don't plan, the plot comes to me as I write. So that's my main. I don't really think about my characters so much. I just kind of let them do their thing. And I've got faith that they're going to come alive on the page in the way that I want them to come alive. The thing that I'm more fixated on and centered on is trying to make my plot work when I don't actually have a plot. So that's how I write. I let the characters do their thing and just fix on the decisions that the characters make, which is what informs the plot and the trajectory of the plot.
I thought the mother-daughter relationship was very, very interesting. I mean, the daughter was only 19 and she was a mother already, and the mother was only all of 39, and she was already a grandmother.
Yes, I mean that was the thing. It's I've written about teenage girls so many times now, and I've got to that point in my career. That's actually my 19th novel. And so I'm always looking for new ways into people's private lives and personal lives and behind the closed doors of people's houses. And it was a case of, I've never done a teenage mother before. And the minute I decided that I wanted to focus on a teenage mother, I just found it interesting to imagine that maybe her mother had also been a teenage mother and that she was therefore a very young grandmother. So that just came out of a sense of, what haven't I written about yet? Which personal relationship, which mother-daughter relationship? Usually my mothers are much more middle-aged. As I say, I write about teenage girls a lot, and their mothers are usually in their 40s and 50s. So it was just interesting from me, from the novelty of it, to explore the relationship between a young mother and her daughter, who's also a young mother.
Well, there's actually three sets of mothers. There's that mother, then of course there's Zach's mother, who was quite unusual, and then Scarlett's mother, who was also quite unusual. Yeah,
so the problem with Zach's mother, and I feel really bad about Zach's mother, is that I brought her into the story because Tallulah had gone missing with her boyfriend Zach, right. So therefore somebody needed to be worried about Zach. And I started writing Zach's mother as being as concerned as Tallulah's mother, and realized that then she was going to become a central character. There was no way that these two mothers could be experiencing this trauma in the same way and not come together and not be an important part of each other's lives. And I just suddenly thought, I don't want Zach's mother to be a part of this. This is Kim's story. I want to focus on Kim. So I was quite unfair to Zach's mother and made her very uncaring, strangely uncaring about the fate of her missing son. I still feel a bit guilty about that. And then, so Scarlett is the teenage girl whose house Tallulah goes to for the pool party, the very wealthy, privileged girl who lives in the mansion. I played with the trope of the poor little rich girl. I had fun with that. She's got everything that a 19-year-old girl could want, but her mother doesn't love her. Her mother is a narcissist. So, that was kind of more of a cliched, stereotypical relationship, I thought. Whereas Kim and Tallulah, I felt there's something a lot fresher about their dynamic.
I also read that you hadn't set a book in a boarding school up until this point.
Yes, exactly. Again, what can I do? Book 19. Where can we go? And I was doing a book event, and another author who was sitting next to me was talking about her first novel. And she said it was set in a boarding school. And I just had that thing. You think that's it. That's the thing. That's what I want to do with my next novel. I want to do a murder mystery set in a boarding school. In fact, if you read the book, you'll see that it doesn't get contained within the boarding school as I'd imagined it would when I started writing it. It's sort of, the story keeps leaching out of the boarding school and trickling down lanes and down back corners and even into the next town along. But that was the main inspiration for it.
And the name of her home, was it Dark City or
Dark Place? Dark Place. So Scarlett's Mansion. Scarlett's Mansion, which I envisaged to be like sort of crazy bohemian Tim Burton-esque mansion that the Rolling Stones might have spent a long hot summer in 1968 recording an album, that sort of place. So it was called Dark Place because when it was first built in the 1600s, it burnt down. So for a long time, it was just a pile of ashes. And the locals called it Dark Place, and then it was rebuilt, but it kept the name Dark Place.
We can't get away with that kind of thing in America.
Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons why my American readers love this book so much, is purely because of that sort of detail. The ashes.
Well,
of the house
actually, that's sort of, I'm so sorry, an interesting question. Have either of you ever set a book, Jean, for example, in England, and then of course Lisa in the U.S.? Or have you? Let's start with Lisa. Answer that.
I have never set a book in the US, but I'm currently writing the sequel to The Family Upstairs. Oh, I can't tell you. No, nothing. No, nothing's happening in America. No, nobody's in America.
That's something there.
No, forget I said anything. No, I've never set a book in America. Jean?
Okay.
My very first novel, which was not published, was set at Cambridge University, where I was a student in the mid 80s, but nothing published. No, but I'm a lifelong Anglophile. I've lived in England several times, and I hope to live there again. So,
and you're married to an Irishman, I see from.
I'm married to a Northern Irishman, which means
Northern Irishman. So
my kids have UK passports or are UK passport eligible or something like that. But,
oh, amazing. Yes, no, I love an Anglophile.
people used to put down their kids for boarding schools. I put down my kids in the British consulate within like a days of their birth. They were registered.
Excellent. Yes. What a gift you give them.
I think so. Well, and also Anglophilism runs in my family because I'm related to Helene Hanff, who wrote 84 Charing Cross Road, and that was the engine of her life, her love of England and her love of books.
Dang, that is really...
Yeah, well, I think that's in your future to do something like that then.
Oh, I have a pipe dream of adapting one of Helene's memoirs, one that didn't get much attention when it was published, but that I think is just a great book. So that's...
Well, I hope so. Well, let's talk a little bit about the setting. Let's talk a little bit about the setting, Jean, for the plot. First of all, obviously, there's two stories. So the first question I have is, did you outline Crib, which, by the way, is excellent within, and I love the name Crib. So did you outline that? Did you outline the other? And then how did you come up with all these various settings and locations?
Well, like Lisa, I am not an outliner. I am a person who figures it out as I go. In the case of the plot, I knew the scenario that I mentioned earlier with the washed up novelist, and I knew what this plot was that he appropriates. And those were really like the two tent poles of the novel, and everything else got worked out along the way. As far as the excerpts of Jake's novel Crib, which appear in the plot, I tried to get out of writing them. I turned in the first draft without them, and my editor said, didn't you say you were gonna write these chapters? But I had heard an interview with Lily King while I was writing the plot, and Lily King's most recent novel was also about a writer who writes a novel that everybody wants to publish and is very successful. And somebody in this interview had said to her, well, did you think of maybe giving us a little taste of this book? And she said, well, every time I thought about it, I thought I could never write anything that would justify the huge publishing frenzy that this book is greeted with. So I decided not to do it. And I thought, awesome, I don't have to do it either. But my editor disagreed. And of course she was right. She's always right. So I wrote those chapters after the main part of the book had been written. And then I slip them into the correct places in the broader novel, because of course, in addition to everything else, they are some manner of clues themselves. So that is how I'm so glad I did it, because people people do love a book within a book. I mean, it's apparently it's a whole thing that people love. So glad I did it.
Were your editors okay with you using Macmillan Publishing? I'm sure.
Oh, they loved it. I mean, I put it there as a kind of a placeholder. I figured they would say, "No, you can't do that," but they loved it. So.
Well, it's still there, so they must have loved it.
Yeah, no, they were fine with it.
Because Jean's publisher is Celadon, which is an imprint of Macmillan, and that was great. I do have a question for you, Jean, on Utica and Stephen King.
I'm so glad you're going to ask me about this. Go ahead.
Okay, so you basically know what the question is. Stephen King said, when you ask an author where they get their ideas, they say they get them, I don't know, in Utica, which is a city. So one of your chapters is named Utica, and tell us a little about how you.
Okay, so I first heard this from my friend Ayelet Waldman, who, sort of did us all a favor by reminding us that Stephen King had solved this problem. I mean, I don't know what it's like in England, but number one question, where do you get your ideas? Number two question, what is your process? Which is a new question. We never got this till a few years ago. Where do you get your ideas? Like you said, your antennae go up. They're in the New York Times. They're everywhere. They're everywhere and they're nowhere. So it's a very frustrating question to answer. And Stephen King said, I get mine in Utica, which is hilarious, especially since I wrote this novel within an hour of Utica, just by coincidence. We have a house in upstate New York, not too far from Utica. And then I was told by Scott Turow that I was wrong, that Stephen King had not said Utica. He said Schenectady, because it was funnier. So I figure Stephen King must be okay with Utica, because after all, he read the book and he said a wonderful thing about it, which is on the cover of the book. Yeah. And I feel like if he felt that I'd misquoted him, he would have taken that opportunity to enlighten me. But it's either Utica or Schenectady, both equidistant from where I wrote the book. So I think I'm okay.
And then one of your chapters is named Utica. So you have a lot of little games in there, which I love, right? Yeah. The Talented Tom.
Talented Tom is the name of of Jake's tormentor. And that's how he knows that this is somebody who he encountered at Ripley.
And one thing, maybe people missed it, I don't know, but when he first meets Anna, she was 35, I think, and you spoke about her long gray hair. That struck me, and you put that in.
My mother begged me to get rid of the long gray hair. She felt it was very unattractive. But I think it's destabilizing often to see young women, a woman with a young face and gray hair. And Anna is being very selective about what she reveals to the world.
Right, exactly. All right, so let me go back to Lisa. Well, you often talk about everyday events or things that you've seen that inspire your novels. I know these are very basic, but what kernel inspired you to write The Night She Disappeared?
Yeah, no, it was that moment at the book event on the panel when the author mentioned. Yeah, it was. I just thought, that's it. I'm going to write a book set in a boarding school. But actually, what happens when you have, and I recognize it so instinctively now. I know exactly what it feels like because I only have one idea a year. So when it comes, I feel it. And so that moment comes and I jump on it and it's like an egg and I sit on it. And then just little like fragments sort of come off that initial idea. And this picture landed in my head of a sign with "Dig Here" written on it. And of course I had imagined that if this was going to be a murder mystery set in the grounds of a boarding school, that the thing buried under the "Dig Here" sign would be human remains of some description. But I got to the chapter where Sophie, my detective novelist, starts digging, and I suddenly thought, it cannot be human remains because I don't know yet if anybody's dead. I don't know if the missing teenagers are dead or alive. And if I make human remains, then I've sort of, I'm limiting my options as to where this story can go. And that's one thing I don't like doing, is limiting my options when I write. I like to leave lots of things open, lots of possibilities open. So I decided to put something else in the hole, in under the sign, and that was kind of the thing that sort of ignited the whole solving of the mystery.
Tell us a bit about your background, your path to becoming an author. We read a great story. This was a bet, how you started writing. Is that accurate?
Oh, yes, you are talking to a former secretary. In fact, at the time that I made the bet with my friend to start writing a novel, I was an out-of-work secretary. So I'd been working as a PA to the marketing director of a shirt maker on Jermyn Street in London. And I had been laid off. I was very, very upset. It was a job that I absolutely loved. But then I had this very, very fortuitous conversation a couple of weeks later with a friend of mine who was a journalist. And she was sick of people saying they wanted to write novels and then not doing anything about it. She was always cheerleading people who wanted to write novels, and then a year later they wouldn't have done anything about it. So I think I was the final straw. And she made me a bet that she would take me out for dinner to my favorite restaurant if I at least wrote 3 chapters. So I wrote the 3 chapters. She took me out for dinner to my favorite restaurant, but she also said that the 3 chapters were really good, and that I should try and get an agent. So she forced me to send them out to some agents. And those were pretty much word for word the first 3 chapters of my first novel, Mouse Party, which came out in 1999. So it was just one of those sliding doors moments. If I had pondered the concept of me writing a novel, it would have been something I'd have done when I was the age I am now. I imagine that if I ever wrote a novel, I'd have to be in my 50s and have had the rich and exciting life full of events that I could use as material. I didn't think that a 26-year-old secretary had the right to to write a novel. A sliding doors moment. I have no idea if I hadn't had that conversation, if I would have waited until I was in my 50s, or if I maybe would never have done it at all. But I'm very, very glad that I did have that conversation.
That's a great friend.
Yes. That is a very, very good friend. And she is still, I'm delighted to say, she's still my friend. And she's now very, very globally successful astrologist. So there you go.
I was actually going to ask you what your friend does. You see, this is a perfect jumping off point, because we like to call this series, we do call this series Women on the Move. And we'd like to talk not only about your books, but a little bit about your private lives and a little bit about your careers and what you might have done otherwise. So we have a bit of your backstory. Lisa, Jean, tell us a little bit about your life.
Well, I'm kind of the opposite in that I was one of those people who just knew from a very early age what I wanted to do. But wanting to be a novelist is not the same as getting to be a novelist. It's hard. It's very hard to do. It looks easier than it is. Failure is our special friend. I think is why so many writers identify with Jake, because we're all Jake. We're all failures in our own eyes. Sadly, I have very few marketable skills. Apart from writing novels, the only other thing I can do is make chocolate-dipped strawberries, because my first job, I'm sure many people who are members of Temple Emanu-El will remember Crone Chocolatier around the corner from Temple Emanu-El. That was my first job where the chocolate dipped strawberry was invented. So yeah, I'm great at that. But apart from that, there's not much else I can do. My first 2 novels were rejected everywhere. It was a pretty scary and depressing time. But if I'm proud of anything, it's that I kept writing. I mean, writing that 3rd book when numbers 1 and 2 had really been trounced was a brave act on my part. So I am quite proud of that.
Well, that's a good lesson to everybody. Just keep plugging away.
Keep plugging away.
Well, we should talk a little bit about The Undoing. In your novel, based on your novel. As most people here know, it's not that long ago.
Based on my novel. Not
exactly.
Based on my novel.
Right.
That's the British edition, yeah.
Now, I did read your book. Of course, I read your book. We discussed it actually in my own book club. And then, of course, we watched The Undoing, and it was different.
Oh, yeah.
I heard you say how different you were surprised. You wanted to find out who did it at the end. Also,
I didn't know who did it. Well, because my novel wasn't about who did it. It was clear who did it. It was about something else. So when David E. Kelley optioned the book, he told me we're going to be leaning more on the character of the husband. It's going to be more of a whodunit. And I said, great. I was very zen about it because I'd had a book adapted, and that had been a bit of a wallop to sort of deal with the changes in that. And by the time The Undoing came along, I was very chill about it. And besides, it's David E. Kelley, so I knew
it's Hugh Grant.
Yeah, well, there was that too. So he said, "Wait, Hugh Grant is going to play Jonathan," and I remember thinking, Jonathan's barely in this story. Oh. Well, that was another big change. So
that's interesting. Lisa, you've had a book or two made into a film. Is that right?
I've had nothing. It's driving me insane.
They should be.
I would say that currently at this point in time, I have 7 novels under option. I have four in Hollywood and 3 in the UK. One of them is one of my romantic comedies, and then the other 6 are thrillers. And I'm hoping that those numbers, they've got to pay off, haven't they? Someone's got to put something into production. But yeah, at this point in time, nothing is in production. Everything's under option. It's all gone very, yes, And She Was Gone needs to be a movie. Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to be looking at the comments, but I just saw that. So yeah, watch this. I hope something happens. It would be lovely.
But how does that work? Do you really lose all control over it when it's sold? Or I guess every deal is different.
Every single production company is completely different. Some want you to attend every meeting and want you to be part of the family while it's all happening. And others just sort of take the book and run away into a dark corner with it, and you never really hear anything about it. So completely, they've all got very different ways of dealing with writers. Right. But I would be like Jean, if I did get to that point of something going into production, I would be very happy to just say, cool, that sounds good. As long as I don't have to turn a why done it into a who done it or whatever, I'd be quite hands off and let it happen.
Jean, were you on the set at all of the Undoing?
I did visit the set a couple of times, but just to show you how deeply unimportant the author is. When I was introduced to people as the author of the novel, seriously, people said, "There's a novel." I mean, it's on one hand, you look around and it's this just incredible moment because you realize that everybody there, whether they're, cooking lunch or driving somebody around or putting tape on the floor or acting, is there because of something that came out of your brain. And that's just wild. That's just an amazing thing. And yet at the same time, they're like, oh, there's a novel. So, I mean, it's your ego is pumped up and completely deflated at the same time. And that's totally fine.
Did you watch it when it was on TV?
Of course. Well, I was lucky enough to be sent the first 5 episodes back in the spring. And I must say that was very kind of HBO because, it was the early weeks of the pandemic. I was not, a happy camper for a lot of reasons, but it was something that my family could all watch together, even though we were in different places. And it was a lovely thing to be able to do.
Well, speaking of the pandemic, this question really is for both of you. Did you write these books the books we're speaking about in the last year during the pandemic? And maybe how long did it take you, each of you, we'll start with Lisa, to put this book together? And how long does it generally take you to write a book?
So I have a really neat, I'm a book a year author, so I'm contracted to deliver a book every year, and I deliver in December. So that makes my years very neat and easy to order. And thus I knew that I'd started the book in early March 2020. Okay. I had 3,000 words down when the pandemic struck and my children got sent home from school. And then I have to say it did take me a long time to come back to it, but it kind of didn't matter at that point of the year because I'm quite slow at the beginning of the process anyway. It took me about a good 6 to 8 weeks to actually get back into a writing routine because I was so thrown. mainly by having my children in the house, but emotionally, psychologically as well. It was quite hard for me to come back and connect to characters that I'd created in what felt like a completely different world. But what I actually did was I threw some money at the problem and rented some office space outside the house. And the minute I was paying money for my writing space, it really did, strangely enough, focus my mind and get me back into routine. So I wrote pretty much the entire book in that office across the street. I let it go for a couple of months when the schools went back after the summer holidays. And then the schools shut again. So I immediately said, have you got another one of those units available? And they did. So I went straight back to it. And so it was a normal year in many ways in terms of my writing routine, but just I wrote it in a different place.
But when you write a book, does your editor ever take parts of it out? How do you react to that?
I have a quite an unusual relationship with my UK editor, in as much as I always used to with all my previous editors. I do the first draft and then I print it out and draw all over it and chop it up and move it around and make huge changes. But I actually show my editor my first draft, and she does it for me, which is hugely unusual, quite weird, I think. But it's like she's an extension of me in a way, that she's almost a part of the writing process for me. So that's what I do. I don't think that's what many writers do. So I'm really happy for her to make massive changes if necessary. She doesn't make the changes. She tells me what changes to make, and I make them, and she's always right.
Do you have a favorite among your books? That would be Lisa.
Yeah, I have because I've written like fluidly from relationship novels into family suspense and drama novels and now into psychological thrillers. I kind of have a little favorite from each section. So I have a favorite romantic comedy, which is one called Vince and Joy, which is a sort of sliding doors type of romance. Then I have a favorite of my family sagas, which was called The House We Grew Up In, which was about a family whose lives are blighted by the obsessive hoarding disorder their mother suffers from. And then from my thrillers, it's always the most recent one that you like the best. So I'm going to say The Night She Disappeared. It's also got my highest Amazon star rating out of all my books as well. So let's say The Night She Disappeared.
It does? It's fabulous. That's interesting. And having a character. Do you have a character of your body of work?
I have a character in a novel of mine called I Found You, called Alice, who I'd been going to write another novel about her, and I kept telling people about the idea for this novel, and everyone kept saying, you can't write that novel, it's awful, nobody's going to want to read it. But I knew I still wanted to write about Alice. She's got 3 dogs and wild children, and she's just one of those women that I would aspire to be like, a woman you'd want to spend a long, dirty night in the pub with and tell her all your secrets and that sort of thing. So yeah, Alice.
See, that's perfect. You can write about the woman you aspire to be. That's perfect. Yeah. Now, Jean, same question. Tell us a little bit about your pandemic, this writing, and some of your favorites.
Unlike Lisa, there was nothing normal about this. I'll start with the headline, which is that the plot was written in 4 months, which is absurd.
Yeah.
It does not inspire confidence. Frankly, if somebody says, here's my novel that I wrote in 4 months, you have my permission to not read that novel, because it's probably going to be terrible. But the other part of the story is that I was in the middle of a different novel that wasn't working that well. And my editor was declining to publish it. And in the middle of a very unhappy discussion about why she wasn't going to publish it, I kind of blurted out that I had another idea, which was the idea about this washed up writer who appropriates his late student's story and what that story was. And she made the suggestion that I put aside the novel that was giving me so much trouble, which I had spent a couple of years on already, and write this instead. Because, as much because I needed some space from this book, as the plot seemed like a very propulsive idea. And then the shutdown happened, and then I was in upstate New York, in our house up there. And I was so grateful to have a reason to not be paying attention, to not be obsessing over what was happening. Because I had also been very, very worried about this virus for months. And I was the only person I knew who was. And I was being told by everybody that I was overreacting. And I wanted to be overreacting. I wanted it to be true that I was overreacting. So I was in a state of real fear and rage at this time. And to be able to write this novel, I mean, it just poured out, partly because I didn't do anything else. So the completed draft, which is very close to the final draft, was ready in June, and it came out the following May. Wow. Then about a year later, I went back to the other novel, which I'm happy to say is now complete and will come out in May. And I'm very, very happy with it. But I really needed that time away from it, as my very wise editor suggested.
Well, we look forward to the next one. So I would like to know, do either of you have questions for each other? Does anybody have anything?
I do. I have a question for Lisa. I actually jotted it down at the beginning because I know how much she's written, and this is something of interest to me. You did kind of answer this already, so, but maybe you could go a layer deeper. I'm just so interested in the fact that you switched genres over the course of your career. Genre has been a big problem for me. It's been like a big obsession for me. But anyway, here's the question. The question is, do you have one idea at a time, or are you one of these people who's like, I'm going to write this novel and then this novel and then this novel? Do you get them one at a time, or do you get them? Do you have a kind of a runway of novels?
No, I don't have a runway of novels. I have there's a book that I've just written. There's during the writing of that novel, I will have an idea for the next novel, and I'll start sort of percolating that one through the system, and that's sort of it. So at the moment, I'm talking about The Night She Disappeared. I'm writing the Family Upstairs sequel, but I already know what the novel after the Family Upstairs sequel is going to be in a very, very loose way. Beyond that, I have no idea, which I don't know. I assume that what you're asking is, do I leave myself the potential to change genre again? As in, or do I have loads of thriller ideas lined up? Or
I'd like to know that too.
Well, no, I'm pretty sure I'm only going to write thrillers now till the end of my career, but I could be wrong. But I'm hearing some subtext with you that you're feeling like.
I mean, to me, the genre issue was that I kept losing readers because I kept changing genre, and people would sort of pick up a new book and say, "Oh, I like the last one, but this sounds totally different," and then they would put it down, and that is how I managed.
Okay. Well, you see, I have to say, yeah, I did. From moving from through the genres as I have done, I've done it very, very carefully, because that was exactly my greatest fear. Every time so when I moved from writing relationship novels into writing family sagas, I didn't just dump the romance completely. I would just move away from it, edge away from it very slowly, and kind of move into another direction very slowly. And I would always use the reader response to the last book to inform how far I felt I could push the next book away from what I'd done in that book, because I was so terrified of that, of my readers saying, oh no, I don't. And that's why it took me so long. It took me so many books to get to where I actually wanted to be, because I was too scared to do it all in one go. So it was baby steps, really.
Well, unfortunately, I didn't have a choice, because I only get one book, and there's no after this I'll write the next one. I mean, it's like the only idea that's ever existed, and after this idea, I may never get another idea.
But you will now know that you.
I mean, history, personal history tells us that I probably will. But when you're in it, I mean, not just a sports analogy, but it's all over the field. When I'm done, there's nothing. I don't have. I can barely get myself, to make myself a cup of coffee. There's just nothing there.
Nothing in the bank.
There's nothing. And then, you say, okay, well, I'm gonna read 500 books now, or it's an exaggeration, but I'm gonna relax. I'm gonna, do some other things. And then something starts to percolate and you got kind of go,
there you go. Yeah, exactly. It's only happened to me once, and it was before I wrote The House We Grew Up In about the hoarder. And I'd finished my book, I'd edited it. I was all set to, fresh piece of paper, I'd start the new book, and I didn't have an idea. So I gave myself 2 weeks. And in that 2 weeks, I just walked miles and miles. Yes, not enough time to read 500 books. 2 weeks. And I just walked for miles every day. And then one day I looked up and I saw a window in an apartment block that was hoarded. You can see when the curtains haven't been opened for 20 years. And I just thought, I wonder who lives there and why are they a hoarder? And but that's the only time I've got to that point in the process, and I haven't had something in the bank. And it was quite scary. So I feel for you, Jean.
As I've gotten older and I've gone through this, 7 times or more, if you count the unpublished books, I am more zen about it. But it's quite the high wire act.
And of course, the more successful you become and the bigger your readership grows and the more books you sell, the more pressure there will be on you to always have that next one all lined up and ready to go.
Thing about, breaking through with book number 7. I got 6 novels out there that have not changed one word from the day they were published. If anybody is just discovering me now, guess what? You've got 6 novels ready to go.
Oh, yes. So you don't have to be waiting for the next.
Yeah.
Go backwards.
I'm very proud of this 6 novels. Okay, maybe not the first one. I would let the first one go. It's very much a first novel, even though it's the 3rd novel. But I'm very proud of the novels that I've written, and I can tell you where to go.
New readers busy. They'll keep your new readers busy until you're ready. But you had a whole novel in the bank this time, so.
Well, yeah, I had a novel that hadn't gotten to where it needed to be. It is the most difficult novel I've ever written. It is kind of the most ambitious, the most, there are 6 protagonists. I've never done anything like this. It has my first person narrator since college. So, there was a lot to work out, but I'm happy to say that we're in good shape and it's, coming out in May.
May, that's not long to wait. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Have either of you taken an MFA program, as Jean talks about in her book? And if you have, or if you've taught one, have you ever come across an obnoxious student, as you talk about? Let's start with Jean.
He's in apparently, my friends who teach tell me that he is in every class. This student is in every class. I myself did not go the MFA route, but I did spend 2 years at Cambridge University, preparing for getting a degree that I knew I would never use. So, and I used a lot of that time to write and certainly to read a lot of books. So I'm not pure here. I mean, I was not working in a blacking factory getting life experience. I've had friends many friends who got MFAs and loved their MFA experiences. One of my best friends got a low residency MFA, just like the one in the plot, which she loved. So, I mean, do I make fun of it? Absolutely. Yeah, but I'm an equal opportunity maker fun of her. And I won't apologize for that because we are ridiculous. I mean, people are ridiculous. Writers are ridiculous. And I can't laugh at them. I noticed somebody in the chat, which we're not looking at, mentioned our scandal of the moment, which is this conflict of 2 writers who met in a writing
Kidneygate.
The Kidneygate. I see Kidneygate just jumped the pond. We're all obsessed with Kidneygate.
Yeah.
If you don't know what I'm talking about, go to Twitter and put in the hashtag kidney person, which is a reference to the last literary scandal, which also had to do with appropriation and who owns what. And that was called the cat person debacle. But I mean, we are ridiculous. Look how these people behaved. It's terrible.
For sure. Well, now that you've mentioned the chat, we've got some you're looking at it, but we've got some very, very nice comments. This one, I will start with Lisa I'll start with Jean. It says, how did you come up with the idea of Jewish genetic disease in the Sabbath Day River?
Oh, really good question. Okay, it was a long time ago. I'm not sure I can remember exactly how I came up with it. But the Sabbath Day River was my second published novel. And it took a real life Irish murder case, which was known as the Kerry Babies Affair. I'd lived in Ireland in the mid 1980s, and sort of combined that real life story with Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. So it took place in New Hampshire in the mid 1980s. And I literally thought about this book for about, I'd say 12 years before I wrote it. And in that time, it sort of became a Jewish story. It had gone from being this very kind of, this Irish story full of Christian iconography. That's not an exaggeration. And out of the cement mixer of fiction, which I'm sure Lisa knows all about, the churning that goes on in your head, it came out the other end as the story about, that was a very, very Jewish story, and in particular made reference to an illness that is associated with Ashkenazi Jews. So that is how it happened.
And I have a comment for Lisa from Allie. It says, this is not a question, but so Lisa, Then She Was Gone is my favorite book ever.
Thank you.
Okay. And now Beth Beth is asking, in the plot, how did you happen to use the town of Sharon Springs? How did you come up with that?
I have a house there, and that's why I wrote the book. I had a lot of emails and contact from people around the towns of Earlville and Hamilton wanting to know why I set part of the plot there. And the answer is I was writing in the Leatherstocking region of upstate New York. And just for fun, I set a chapter there, and that placed the character Jake there. And when he begins to write his book, I felt that he would look around into the local environment to find a place to set what he was writing. So it was a bit of a chain sequence of events.
And now this one is for Lisa. Suzanne said, I was devastated at the end of Then She Was Gone, and I wish it could have been different, but I suppose it had to be.
Yes. Okay. No. Well, I have a treat for you then, Suzanne, because the original version of Then She Was Gone, Ellie doesn't die. Then I handed it to my editor, and she told me that Ellie must die. But I kept the original ending, and I blogged about it. And if you'd like to read the original ending, where Ellie doesn't die, it's available online. And you would just need to Google Then She Was Gone alternative ending. If you Google that, Then She Was Gone alternative ending, you'll find it on the Richard and Judy website, and you can read it and see what you think. And most people who I've directed to read it have come back saying, I understand why you did what you did now, because it's a more satisfying and successful end to the book. So.
Right. And several people would like to know, who do you enjoy reading? Can you mention a few other genres or authors that you like? And the question is, while you're writing, do you have time to read other authors? Let's start with Jean.
Sorry. That's okay. Yeah, I read throughout. I've never had that problem of be fearful about emulating another style. I feel like at my age, and after all these novels, it's impossible for me not to write like myself. I mean, I had enough of a problem trying to write the chapters within the plot in a way that was discernibly different from the plot. So I really enjoy reading other people's books. I also listen to a lot of books. And was that the whole question, or was there something?
Well, that was basically it. Who do you enjoy reading, as anybody can mention? Good. Pretty much that's it.
For me, it's always been more about individual books that I've loved rather than authors that I've loved.
Sure.
anyone who's written any novel that I've loved has also written a novel that I didn't love. So I tend to answer the question by pivoting to books rather than authors. But, certainly as far as thrillers are concerned, I will read anything that Thomas Perry writes. I will get up, walk out the door, go to the bookstore, and buy whatever Thomas Perry's new book is. And everything else, I read everything. I read Lisa, I read all my friends. I read Jane Green is another great friend of mine. I read all of her books. So the only things I don't read are science fiction. I'm not a big romance person. I don't like fantasy, but I read biographies, nonfiction, literary fiction, commercial fiction. I love memoirs, so I'm good. Lots to choose from.
Lisa, same. We're going to wrap up in a moment or two, but last two or three. Questions.
Yeah, like Jean, I don't. I have a go-to author, and I'm the publishing marketeer's dream in that I love the hyped up books. I get really excited when I know there's a big book coming and I'm on it. And generally speaking, satisfied. I read a lot of my contemporaries, as Jean says, friends as well. So a lot of my contemporaries are also my friends. So I read a lot of British female psychological thriller writers. Louise Candlish is one of my favorites, and she's also a really lovely person. But I've been reading a lot more American psychological thrillers recently as well, which I'm really loving a lot. Can't find one to hand. And what was the other part of that question?
Basically who you enjoy reading, and also if you have time to read while you're writing.
Oh yeah, well I read in bed, so I definitely don't at night. Not during the day. I'd love to be in bed reading during the day, but I'm not doing that. So therefore it would never cut into my writing time, because my writing time is during the day. So they're two completely different chunks of the day. And exactly as Jean says, I keep copying Jean. I can't write. There's no way somebody else's writing style is going to influence me at this point. This is, it'd be like if I spent time talking to someone with a Scottish accent, I would start talking in a Scottish accent. This is my accent, and that's my writer's voice, and I'm not that easily influenced now. Sorry, what were you going to say, Jean?
Oh, it's a known and expected phase for an early writer, to emulate. And that I think it's like an important phase. Like my husband is a poet. He spent his early years copying T.S. Eliot. When I wrote poetry, I copied Sylvia Plath. I think it's almost required to go through that phase. But by the time you're doing your mature work, you are yourself. You've moved past that into something else.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you. I am thrilled, beyond thrilled, that the two of you were here with us today. I love both of your books. Everybody who's watching always loves your books. I'd like to talk to the audience here. We sent all your books out. You should have received them. If you'd still like to order a book, please go on our website. It might have been on the chat the whole time. I wasn't actually watching. But these are two fabulous authors, and we love all their books, and we can't thank them enough. And next week, Joyce Maynard will be interviewed right here at 11:30, and she's another one of my favorites. And thank you, Jean, and thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
We hope when the world is normal.
Lovely to meet you, Jean.
So lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I am
really
so
nice.
excited about the sequel to The Family Upstairs.
Well, wish me luck.
Yeah, good luck. And I think I'm being sent your new book. I think your editor is sending it to me. I'm very excited to read it.
Okay, good. I hope you like it. And I'm looking forward to May very much.
We hope we have you both in person as soon as we can.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Here's to that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.